Hello, this is Professor Rook. I am an education faculty member at Franciscan University of Steubenville, and I'm really excited to share this time with you today as we discuss culturally responsive teaching and how this technique can be specifically used in a very effective way to meet the needs of English language learners. Expert in the field of education, Dr. Geneva Gay, is a professor of education at the University of Washington, Seattle. Here, she teaches multicultural education and general curriculum theory. Dr. Gay is known internationally for her scholarship in multicultural education, particularly as it relates to curriculum design, staff development, and classroom instruction. Dr. Gay has been a pioneer of culturally responsive teaching, which is denoted by the acronym CRT, and she has written several books on this topic. Dr. Gay defines CRT as using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, and performance styles of diverse students to make learning more appropriate and effective for them. It teaches to and through the strengths of these students. Though they have similarities, culturally responsive teaching and multicultural education are not the same. Too often, the terms culturally responsive teaching and multicultural education are used interchangeably. Multicultural education really focuses on celebrating and honoring diversity, while culturally responsive teaching focuses on building students' learning power. It's important to remember that culturally responsive teaching isn't about diversity training, but instead it's about helping students reach deeper levels of understanding. If educators continue to confuse the purpose and process of culturally responsive pedagogy, then they'll never be able to realize its full potential to create more equitable outcomes for their students. There are several important characteristics of culturally responsive teaching, which are enumerated on this slide and which will be discussed throughout this presentation. These characteristics include displaying positive parental and familial perspectives and interactions, communicating high expectations, teaching within the context of culture, creating an inclusive classroom through culturally mediated pedagogy, employing student-centered instruction, and reshaping the curriculum to include interdisciplinary connections. So the first characteristic of culturally responsive teaching that we'll discuss is displaying positive parent-family perspectives and interactions. Since they are their child's first teacher, parents and guardians are critically important school partners. To help parents become aware of how they can be effective advocates and supporters in their child's education, teachers need to engage in dialogue with students' parents as early as possible. They should listen to parents' aspirations for their child, their perceptions of their child's needs, and their advice for how teachers can help. Developing a trusting relationship is critical to parents and teachers working together in a way that bears fruit in the lives of students. Furthermore, research shows that parental and familial involvement in a child's educational process yields better scholastic achievement on his or her behalf. When families share the intimate knowledge and understanding they have of their child or children with instructors, teachers gain a better idea of their students' background knowledge, capabilities, and intelligence type. So, how do teachers engage in dialogue in order to understand parents' hopes, concerns, and suggestions? Well, they can conduct needs assessments to find out what parents expect of the school. For English language learners, these needs assessments should be in the parent's first language, as this promotes clarity, displays the teacher's true interest and concern, and helps to build trust. Teachers can also establish parent-teacher committees to foster school and home collaboration, and they can visit the homes of English language learners so that the parents feel more comfortable and able to speak freely about their expectations and concerns for their child. Teachers should also ensure that parents are well informed of school services and activities. This can be achieved in several ways. Teachers can send weekly newsletters in the home language of English language learners so parents are aware of school functions. They can also host family nights at school to introduce parents to concepts being taught. Additionally, teachers must engage in learning themselves. They need to research the cultural backgrounds of their students' families and visit and tour their neighborhoods and communities so they have a clear understanding of students' local context and backgrounds. Another important characteristic of culturally responsive teaching is communicating high expectations for students. Before we dive into this concept, we need to talk about another related topic: grit. Grit is defined as perseverance and passion for long term goals. Grit involves working strenuously toward challenges, maintaining effort and interest over years despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. The gritty individual approaches achievement as a marathon. His or her advantage is stamina. While disappointment or boredom may lead most people to change trajectory, the gritty individual stays the course. Effective and consistent communication of high expectations helps students develop grit, which in turn fosters intrinsic motivation to succeed and keep improving. In order to create appropriate expectations and outcomes for their students, culturally responsive teachers need to understand students' behavior in light of the norms of their home communities, and they need to let this knowledge inform the way they shape their expectations and outcomes. To effectively communicate clear expectations, teachers need to be very specific in what they expect students to know and accomplish. For all students, English language learners especially, rubrics are an excellent means for communicating expectations in a detailed and transparent manner. Teachers can foster student commitment to high expectations by creating a classroom environment in which there's genuine respect for and among students, and where failure simply indicates the need for improvement and continued effort. Helping students develop a growth mindset is critical to helping students engender confidence in their abilities and commitment to high expectations. To promote consistent effort and achievement, teachers should wait and offer praise once the goals are met. The next characteristic of culturally responsive teaching that we'll discuss is teaching within the context of culture. According to author and education professor Maria Wilson Portuondo, the increasing diversity in our schools, the ongoing demographic changes across the nation, and the movement towards globalization dictate that we developed a more in-depth understanding of culture if we want to bring about true understanding among diverse populations. Because English language learners live in homes where the language and culture are not closely aligned with that of schools, they may become alienated and feel disengaged from learning. It is important for teachers to remember that different cultures experience schooling in different ways, so English language learners' expectations for learning may be different. For instance, some cultural groups employ cooperative learning, while others employ independent strategies and activities. Teachers really need to work to gain a strong understanding of the cultures represented in their specific classrooms so they can adapt their lessons to reflect ways of communicating and learning that are familiar to their students. In this way, they can maximize the learning opportunities of their English language learners. Honestly, teaching within the context of culture weighs heavily on differentiating instruction according to the multiple intelligences of the students present in the classroom. According to English language learner instructor and author Valerie Schnifferdenoff, activities should include different kinds of opportunities for individual, paired, and group work, as well as tasks that appeal to a range of learners, like creating charts, drawings, gathering information, and presenting. Differentiating instruction enables your teaching to connect with more of your students. Some other best practices, according to Vladkowski and Ginsburg, that you should consider as you vary your teaching strategies are as follows. Employ cooperative learning when first introducing material and assign independent work after students are familiar with the concept. Use think, pair, share, and role-playing strategies. Support student choice by providing different options for completing an assignment. Assign students research or inquiry-based projects that examine issues that apply to their own community or cultural group. While differentiating instruction is important to teaching within the context of culture, so is employing communication that aims to bridge cultural differences. To communicate effectively in such a way, teachers should talk to students about individual differences and demonstrate that differences make for better, deeper learning. Teachers should make intentional efforts to attend community events that students attend and find opportunities to discuss these events during instructional time. Creating an inclusive classroom is critical to culturally responsive teaching. And for classes with English language learners, inclusion can be fostered through culturally mediated instruction. Culturally mediated instruction incorporates varied ways of knowing, analyzing, and representing information. The culturally mediated learning environment is one that encourages multicultural viewpoints and allows for inclusion of knowledge that is relevant to the students. To establish inclusive classrooms, teachers need to emphasize the purpose of what is being learned and connect this to students' experiences. Teachers also need to share ownership of knowing with students. One way this can be achieved is by involving students in setting objectives and goals for an assigned project. To employ culture at the service of inclusion, teachers should research students' learning experiences and speak to educators with the same cultural background about effective ways to instruct students from the same culture. Teachers should also ask students about their preferred learning styles and dialogue routinely with parents about how much their child is learning at school and how the teacher can enhance the learning process. For English language learners, it is important that teachers allow students to employ their first language to enhance learning, and they should always portray a positive attitude toward students' multilingual abilities. Teachers should also allow students numerous opportunities to share their cultural knowledge and allow for dialogue, questioning, and analysis of all people's beliefs and actions, as this helps to build deeper understanding and respect of other belief systems. With respect to teaching strategies, collaborative and cooperative learning, writing groups, peer tutoring, role play, focus groups, and teacher reframing of students' observations or responses are all effective ways to build an inclusive classroom that employs culture at the service of deeper student learning. Creating an inclusive classroom is critical to culturally responsive teaching. And for classes with English language learners, inclusion can be fostered through culturally mediated instruction. Culturally mediated instruction incorporates varied ways of knowing, analyzing, and representing information. The culturally mediated learning environment is one that encourages multicultural viewpoints and allows for inclusion of knowledge that is relevant to the students. To establish inclusive classrooms, teachers need to emphasize the purpose of what is being learned and connect this to students' experiences. Teachers also need to share ownership of knowing with students. One way this can be achieved is by involving students in setting objectives and goals for an assigned project. To employ culture at the service of inclusion, teachers should research students' learning experiences and speak to educators with the same cultural background about effective ways to instruct students from the same culture. Teachers should also ask students about their preferred learning styles and dialogue routinely with parents about how much their child is learning at school and how the teacher can enhance the learning process. For English language learners, it is important that teachers allow students to employ their first language to enhance learning. In addition, they should always portray a positive attitude towards students' multilingual abilities. Teachers should also allow students numerous opportunities to share their cultural knowledge, and they should encourage dialogue, questioning, and analysis of all people's beliefs and actions, as this helps to build deeper understanding and respect of others' belief systems. With respect to teaching strategies, collaborative and cooperative learning, writing groups, peer tutoring, role play, focus groups, and teacher reframing of students' observations or responses are all effective ways to build an inclusive classroom that employs culture to deepen student learning. Student centered instruction is an important element of culturally responsive teaching. Student centered instruction differs from traditional teacher centered instruction because in the student centered classroom, learning is community oriented. Students are encouraged to engage cooperatively on assignments that are both culturally and socially relevant to them. This is important because research shows that students develop cognitively through their interaction with both adults and more knowledgeable peers. Furthermore, these interactions enable students to formulate conjectures, investigate new ideas, and acquire feedback from both their teacher and classmates. Some examples of student centered instructional approaches are as follows: soliciting student participation in generating a set of topics to study, having students lead discussions or asking students to reteach concepts, creating inquiry or discovery oriented research projects or problems that students can work to complete cooperatively. This is particularly excellent in STEM courses. Creating a classroom community by routinely inviting students to share. Employing literature circles in disciplines like reading or social studies, where students are reading texts with difficult language or more challenging literary concepts. Using cooperative techniques in general that involve dialogue and verbal exchange, like think, pair, share, or the jigsaw strategy. Such teaching strategies are particularly important for English language learners as they not only give them practice with content specific language, but they also help them to feel more connected to their peers and confident in their capabilities. Some other culturally responsive, student centered teaching techniques that are especially helpful for English language learners are chunking, where you break down difficult tasks or problems into smaller, more manageable pieces. You can do this in any cooperative lesson by either alternating between chunks of direct instruction and cooperative activity, or by giving each group structured handouts that chunk the material strategically so it is more manageable and scaffolds student understanding effectively. Exit surveys are another means for ensuring that your instruction is centered on your students' needs. Exit surveys simply ask students to complete a few questions at the end of class to determine what they really learned and for you to also determine where their misunderstandings still lie. Exit surveys are excellent, efficient forms of informal assessment that can inform your future instruction. The interdisciplinary curriculum naturally aligns with culturally responsive teaching because culturally responsive teaching looks to integrate various cultural perspectives and topics related to the students' backgrounds. Integrating various disciplines together showcases the interrelatedness of different subjects, stimulates greater student interest, and facilitates the acquisition of new knowledge, especially for English language learners. This occurs because student strengths in one subject area support their learning in another. Collaborative projects are a great way to infuse interdisciplinary elements into the curriculum. Some ideas of projects may include having students research aspects of a topic within their community, or having them interview community members about this very topic. Within the project itself, each team member can take on a certain role. This will give English language learners the opportunity to choose a role they feel confident in while simultaneously building community with their classmates and learning from their peers. As mentioned earlier, one way to ensure that the goals and tasks of an interdisciplinary project are clear to all the students is by using a rubric to assess the outcome. Now that we've examined several key characteristics of culturally responsive teaching, let's look at culturally responsive teaching in action in a multilingual classroom. As you watch this video, please refer to handout 2 and consider the questions that are posed. Particularly think about how the pedagogical strategies employed by the teachers in the video connect to some of the characteristics of culturally responsive teaching that we have been discussing today. What I'd like you to do now is to take some time and discuss your thoughts and your responses to the questions on the handout with 3 people near you. Now that we have all had time to reflect on the video and discuss the questions on the handout in small groups, let's share what aspects of culturally responsive teaching were particularly striking to each of us in the video. Personally, I really like the multilingual classroom video because it concretely demonstrates how culturally responsive teaching is focused on the needs of each teacher's specific student body. Culturally responsive teaching will look different for any given classroom because the students, their cultural backgrounds, and their learning needs are distinct. Furthermore, I appreciate this video because it shows how to employ cultural features of your student body to scaffold student understanding and to foster student self-confidence, engagement, and motivation to learn. As we conclude, if there were a few key elements that I would hope stick with you, it would be the characteristics included on this slide, which I call the 3 E's. First, to be effective in multicultural classrooms with English language learners, teachers must relate teaching content to the cultural backgrounds of their students, and they must view their students' linguistic and cultural differences as strengths. They can do this by establishing inclusion, creating a learning atmosphere where everyone feels valued and connected. Secondly, they need to enhance meaning by creating challenging learning experiences that reflect student values and topics that are important to them. And finally, they need to engender competence and motivation by allowing students multiple ways to represent knowledge and skills, encouraging self-assessment, and speaking routinely of cultural and linguistic differences as assets. Thank you so much for joining me for this presentation. It has been a true pleasure. All of the references employed throughout this presentation are listed on both this and the following slide.